Welcome back to another episode of Meredith with a Y. I am your host, Meredith Willits. What do you get when you mix a Harvard scholar, a rock musician, a rebel filmmaker, and a man literally gifted a piece of an island by a tribe who believed his arrival was prophesied by their god? Wait, what? Yes, you get Cevin Soling, a visionary who's been called one of the most provocative cultural critics of our time. He's produced and directed nearly 20 films airing on MTV, HBO, BBC, Showtime, and PBS, including The War on Kids, the first ever theatrically released documentary exposing how American schools have come to resemble prisons. That film earned Best Educational Documentary honors and praise from the New York Times, Variety, and the Huffington Post. He's a musician whose band hit #1 for 12 weeks on the American Independent charts, a producer for Jackie Chan and Herman Hermits, and a creator of one of the most bizarre and brilliant documentaries ever made about people drilling holes into their heads for enlightenment. Kevin's not afraid to question everything from education and culture to our collective compliance. His book, The Student Resistance Handbook, is a manifesto for youth empowerment, exposing how conformity crushes creativity and how rebellion can be the highest form of learning. He's been featured on Comedy Central's The Colbert Report, MSNBC's Dr. Nancy Show, NPR's Leonard Lopate Show. He's lectured at Harvard, Yale, South by Southwest, and TEDx, and continues to challenge every assumption about what it means to be educated. Today, we're diving into what happens when you refuse to accept limits, physical, social, or intellectual, and instead choose to live wide awake. So stay with us. Hello, everyone. This is Meredith with a Y, and I am your host, Meredith Willits. Today, we are going to go deep, changing lives, and I am giving you the keys to the castle. Cevin, thank you so much for being with me. I wanted to read every bit of it because one of the reasons I agreed to have you on was because of your background is absolutely wild. So thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, I'm afraid to continue the interview after that intro because I figure it can only be disappointing after that.
Not at all. Not at all. So I went out. Usually I make people send me their books, but for whatever reason, I'm like, you know what? I'm going to buy this damn thing myself. And so I went out and purchased it, sat down in the backyard, opened it up, started reading, had no idea what was about to happen. And I have to say, you have changed my mind on so many things about our education system that I just 100% took for granted. This is the way it is. It's a good thing, as you state so many times in the book. It's for the betterment of all. And you really challenged me. How did you get to this place, being a person that is speaking at Harvard, etc.?
So yeah, I was went to compulsory schooling, public school, and I had always found the experience to be just humiliating and degrading, and just despised every minute that I was subjected to schooling, and I did well, obviously, but I see a lot of my friends, a lot of my classmates. Just really having a hard time, and not just academically. Many of them did very well academically as well, but they just sort of crumbled under the pressure. And one of the things that people don't really talk about when they're looking, parents might try, if they have some influence over what schools that they can send their kids to, and they look at graduation rates and which schools are sending more kids to prestigious universities. That they'll tend to check those schools, but those schools also tend to have much higher suicide rates. Yeah. And that's something that's just not advertised. And that was certainly something that I witnessed among classmates who either attempted or succeeded in taking their lives. And this was something that obviously was incredibly troubling, because it truly is epidemic proportions, and still is today. And where they were shutting down the world in response to fears about COVID, the mortality rate for public education was higher than it was for COVID at its worst. And no one
Wow.
would consider shutting down schools. But the Centers for Disease Control every 6 years publishes a report about suicidal ideation, and the numbers are so disturbing. And this, a lot of people will say, "Oh, social media plays a role," and it certainly does. But if that didn't really come about until 2012, and you can see the numbers before 2012, and it was 1 out of 6 students will seriously consider taking their lives, and 1 out of 12 will make an attempt on their lives in some capacity. And it's hard to even accept those numbers because they're so huge, but they're consistently reported, every 6 years by the CDC. Uh, and that's really troubling, and definitely demands some kind of reaction and response.
Yeah. I mean, I know my daughter, was a RA at her university, and I think it wasn't I mean, it was at least once or twice a year being an RA that she had to contend with very serious either attempts or, plans of attempts, whereas she had to step in as a resident advisor for her fraternity her college, and it was a lot of the pressure, and even she I remember she went into college to be a doctor, right? And she started the biology, path and realized, like, this is not for me, and waited 12 months until she came to us and said, "I don't wanna do this anymore," and the pressure was so overwhelming to her, and we're like, "Well, I don't care what you do. You can do whatever you want." But I think that internalized, the ego attachment to, like, "This is a good job. This is what my parents want me to do. This is what I've told everyone that I'm gonna be a doctor," all that stuff. It really affects you, and, I know with my youngest son, he's a freshman in high school, and, when we would go in and talk to teachers and they'd be like XYZ grades, yada, yada, test scores, and I'd say, "Look," because they always ask, "Well, what is your goal for your son?" And every single time I would say, "I just want him to like learning." He's not gonna come home. I'm not going to beat him to submission in the kitchen and, like, "You have to get A's and you have to get B's and you have to study for here for 3 hours." And I said the same thing, and I've said it every single year to anyone that will listen at his school, is I want him to still like coming here. I don't want him to crack and have, like, as you're saying, a dead kid because he's not in alignment with every one of his peers. And as it is, he's like one of the youngest kids in his class. And so that brings in a different sort of pressure. But you're taking this one step further. You're saying, look, everything about school is militant and fascist. It is go in, you have to, and this is we've been talking about this on social media, that they are basically have been training American citizens through the public education system to be soldiers, to be workers, auto workers, to be the good citizen, to learn how to be a citizen of the United States, take direction, follow orders, submit, etc., for long periods of the day throughout the day. And so we know this at this point, why school was created. What you're saying is okay, now we know this, and this book is what we're going to do about it. We're going to go in and just upend the whole place.
Yeah, I mean, it comes to, I mean, schools, you can take different approaches as to why schools were created. You can, imbue it with some kind of noble purpose. And I do think many of the people who are involved in schooling, the teachers, administrators, parents who send their kids there, I think the majority, the overwhelming majority, think that this is ultimately constructive, and that they're not doing it to, to create an obedient population. But it sort of, it starts with breaking that down, and it's sort of like, what you were saying, what skills, what characteristics, what traits do we want our kids to develop and foster? We want them to be empathetic, good-hearted people who are intellectually curious and creative and confident and articulate and literate and self-reliant and rational. And the question is, do schools, are schools conducive environments to foster these traits? And Clearly, they're not. They're even the things schools advertise themselves as trying to achieve, which isn't even coherent. Either there are three or four, I guess, separate uh, concepts that schools, claim to either to achieve. One is literacy, another is skills for the workplace, another is socialization, and then you'd mentioned also democratic values. And and in each one of these, we know schools fail miserably. You look at the literacy rates among 12th graders. So we're not even, if you exclude dropouts, proficiency among 12th graders in literacy skills is at 37% from the latest Department of Education
Wow.
report, and only 25% in math. And that, and those are the things that school focuses, predominantly on. Forget history, forget the sciences or anything like that. The things that they devote most of the time, they're just, I mean, that's well below a failing grade.
Yeah.
They don't develop skills for the workplace. They produce the critical thinking and collaborative skills. Are just not things that are developed in schools. Socialization. You're forced to be with people you hate. Bullying is endemic, not just bullying between kids, but the worst bullying, which there isn't even no vocabulary for, is the teachers and administrators. Their bullying of kids is not even considered or counted. And then democratic values are just absent in schools. The kids, students just have profoundly diminished rights in all regards. The limited freedom of speech. They can be searched, for any reason. Their lockers, their persons. Just about. There's no due process if they're being interrogated by a principal, even for something that could lead to criminal charges. There's no due process that's adhered to. The only thing they get a semblance of is voting, which is only voting for student government, where the people they're voting on have no power to make any changes. So they're so even the things schools advertise that they develop, they objectively fail at miserably. And what does that leave? That leaves all the horrible consequences of the environment. The first lesson. So one of the things that people, when people ever talk about reform, they talk about the curriculum, they talk about improving teaching in some capacity, or student engagement. The one thing that the reason why the history of compulsory schooling is the history of reform and failed reform is because the one thing that is never addressed, that can never be addressed, is the superstructure itself, the construct of schooling. And the construct of schooling is that social efficiency. You don't, each student isn't given an individual attention for their intellectual and physical needs. That conclude, the amount of sleep they need and food they need to eat.
Yeah.
There's no social or psychological individual, attention to these things, their aspiration, their emotional needs. It's collective, and it's done so for financial reasons, for economic reasons. You have to treat people as a group, and if you're treating people as in a factory of people where you have a large number that have to be processed by the system. The first lesson that has to be learned is you will sit down, you will shut up, and you will listen to me. There has to be obedience to authority. It has to be the very first lesson that has to be ingrained and repeatedly drilled in, because the system won't work otherwise. And there's all sorts of consequences to that sort of thing, that sort of structure.
Do you see any way out of that? Like, have you've got the book, you're like, okay, and this is actually for students to resist. Like, this book is written to students, and you go through like, hey, don't do anything illegal. Understand that there will be consequences to the things that I've written in here. You have to be willing to accept those consequences, even down to going against the people that bring things into the school. So food suppliers that are coming into school, like, boycott them and make their life difficult, and report the teachers. Give them a report card at and slide it under their door because it'll make them mentally insane knowing that they are not doing a good job. um, and as I go through this, like what do you see? Because I know people are leaning towards vouchers. People are trying to lean towards learning, like either you're a visual learner or you're an audio learner, you're a tactile learner. I think that schools are trying to do that. I think that it can be complicated because you have a class of 26, maybe a class of 50 in some cases. What do you see as being the fix of all of this? Like we are ass deep in American education system. Where do we go from here? Do we say okay, like I think it's China where they're like, okay, we see as being a math science person, you're going to go to a STEM school. You're, a physical person, you're going to go to a gymnastics school, like whatever it is. You're going to go to an art school, you're going to go to a music theater school, you're going to go to this. What do you see as being a possible fix to this, considering we do need people to sit and listen and not disrupt kids around them? Because I will say, having two kids currently in high school, it is irritating as hell to them when they've got, this lunatic that's causing ruckus, taking the teacher's attention, and they know they have a test in 3 days and they do want to get the work, and this person can't sit still or doesn't want to sit still or whatever. Like, how do we fix this?
So the problem is the construct of schooling, and when you have the whole obedience to authority model, and you have you then have to drug the kids to get them to go against their biology,
Yeah.
and there's all sorts of horrible consequences. So first, it's appreciating that just the abject harm, the neurosis, the psychosis, the depression, just the mental health issues that are associated with the compulsory school system, and that people aren't learning. And once you start really accepting and understanding this, because the facts are all there, it's the willingness to abandon that model and move on to other means. And the problem with the existing model is its convenience. We don't have appropriate daycare, and schools are function as a daycare factory,
Yeah.
and that's and that convenience, because parents need work, they need someone to look after their kids. But so that does need to be accommodated in some capacity. I'm not saying that we need to upend society altogether, but there's a lot we know about learning. There's a lot that's sort of you explain it, it makes a lot of sense, and that is people will put tremendous hours of work to learn something or do something that is that develops all sorts of skills, if it's meaningful to them, and the process is enjoyable. You can spend hours and hours on a puzzle, or hours and hours on a game, or something that is that is rewarding in some capacity. If you're interested in even something tangible, auto repair or something like that, and you're just learning it, and you're 14, and you've got all the parts to a carburetor, and you're sitting there, you will go without sleep to build this thing, because the sense of accomplishment, and to do this, and are you learning in the process? Of course you're learning. It's tremendous amount of learning, and because you're self motivated and self directed and interested in it, the process is one that will stick with you. You will remember this, and you'll remember the achievement of learning. And there's all sorts of ways of accomplishing that can be done. One is we have libraries that are publicly funded all over the country, and libraries are an amazing place of learning, and librarians are mentors. If you go into a library, you say, so self-directed learning is what I'm driving at. But if you go to a
Yeah.
library and you say, I'm interested in horses, then the librarian will say, "Great, we've got a whole section on horses, but what are you interested in horses? Are you interested in veterinary care for horses, riding horses, or competitive? There's all sorts of things." And they go, "I'm kind of interested in this aspect of it." And the librarian will take you to a section, where there's all these books on it, and then they say, they might also, if they know, there's actually, a place where a stable where there's horses, and you can go there after school or something, or after hours. I guess not school in this case, but
Right, right.
if you can get someone to take you there, you can, hands-on experience with horses, and you can kind of learn. You can take care of them. I'm sure they'd be happy to have, someone help feed them, and groom them. So there's ways to be interactive that could be directed, and there's a whole population that we've marginalized as well as kids. So we take kids out of the social square by putting them in schools. We also take the elderly, who have a whole history of experience and a whole capacity, who would love to share their knowledge and their history, and could provide all sorts of mentorship and guidance, and their experience in various fields, who could fulfill the daycare function at the same time as helping guide these kids to the things that interest them. So when I was working on the War on Kids film, there was a number of 13-year-old, 12, 13, 14-year-old kids who were interested in electric cars, and they were fascinated by this, and they were building their own electric vehicle. And one of the girls who was part of this project, she didn't like math. She wasn't, math was something interested, but she liked it. She had to learn math and physics to, for her contribution to this project. And because it had relevant meaning, she buckled down and said,
Wow.
this isn't something I would have wanted to really learn on my own, but because I see its necessity of this project, I'm going to learn this. And she did it through online resources. There was,
Hmm.
all YouTube videos and what have you on for the appropriate, math and physics that she needed for the project. And they ended up building an electric car. So
Wow.
it was absolutely amazing. But it's, if you're worried about, oh, they're not going to, learn something, well, yeah, there are some things that they might not learn that as a parent you might want them to learn, and you can, as a parent, you can intercede and say, I know this isn't something that's within the things that you're interested in, but my as a parent, I think it's very important that you learn this, and you're gonna learn this, but and we'll find a way to bring it, because I think it's important, and it will
Yeah.
become important. So it's not saying that there's no parental
So
advisory
more like
role.
intuitive. Like, I mean, when as you're talking, I'm sitting there trying to imagine like the model. And to me, it's very much the model of college, like going to a university where you do get to pick what direction you have your learning education requirements, maybe your first year, just to kind of make sure that you can write a paper so that when you do go the history path or you do go the medical path, can you write a paper, right? So we have your learning education requirements. I mean, the way I'm kind of seeing it is a little bit like what we have right now, K through maybe sixth or fifth grade, and then kind of going towards more of a university college model where you can lean into those things that you actually are interested in, maybe going to beauty school and learning about cosmetology, maybe going and learning about woodworking and building homes and business and what it takes to run an HVAC company or whatever. And then so kids feel more empowered, because I'll be honest with you, like I said, I have 4 kids. They've all been through the schools, public schools, and it is really hard to sell my kids on algebra when I know they have no, trigonometry. I know, being an adult, having a bunch of adults around me, none of us are using trigonometry. None of us are using, advanced versions of biology or chemistry. Maybe a nice, educated conversation amount that you know what the periodic table is and you know that certain things are, whatever elements. Um, but what I see is just kind of like starting the college concept much younger makes more sense. Like, is that like more in alignment?
No, I'd say with the library, I think the problem with college is, so college is a different scenario, because you're in school voluntarily, and so
Right.
whatever negatives there are to college, and I'll get into that briefly, you've come to accept. It's a contract that you've made. I'm willing to give up. And what it is the that you are still graded by an authority figure who can act, somewhat arbitrarily. You're graded, which, you on metrics that you didn't necessarily, well, in college you agreed to, but but you still have a grading system, and you might be opposed to the metrics that are applied. But again, these are sacrifices that you've made. When it's self-directed learning, so if in school, it could be college or it could be high school. If you want to learn a musical instrument, if you want to pick up violin, and you want to study violin, and you're like, what, I'm really interested in violin. I'm really interested in composition, but I'm interested in sort of a free form, jazz influenced, composition. Well, you take a class in high school or college. No, you're not going to be graded on that. You're going to be graded on your technical proficiency. You're going to be graded on, your capacity to learn scales, and, all sorts of things that you didn't sign up for, and that you don't necessarily, not that they're not important in some capacity, but they're not what's driving you. And you're going to be alienated from this instrument. It's just like, that's not what I wanted to do with the violin.
Yeah.
But with self-directed learning, you can become, incredible, at it, based on the things that you've set forth yourself that are interested to you. And then maybe you pick up some of those other skills in the capacity to, because it's important to you to develop the things that you want to develop. So again, I believe in mentorship, and I believe that it's helping develop the things that you're most interested in, while at the same time having someone who is wise enough and experienced enough to say, here are things you don't know about, because how could you know about these things?
Yeah.
I have to introduce you, because you're a kid. You haven't seen the world and experienced the world, and maybe these resonate at this time, maybe they don't. But if they're not resonating right now, me forcing you isn't going to help you want to learn these things. So college definitely has its place, like I said, because it's voluntary, but it's still, there's still compromises in college that aren't necessarily conducive to the optimal form of learning. And the optimal form, from all research and studies, is when it's self-directed, when it's the things that that interest you, and trying to expose people. But again, there are things where you might need to learn, because
Yeah.
that don't interest you, and those, you need someone to, you got to suck it up, because this is
Yeah.
going to be important. You need to know enough math to balance a checkbook, and
Yeah.
know how to apply for a mortgage, and what your, the consequences of the terms are.
Well, as you're thinking, it's like, okay, if we did more of a free form school concept where people maybe learned the things and then could steer their education in a direction that was kind of for them. So, teaching life skills, for example, like you just said, balancing a checkbook. I think that's one of the biggest failures of our school system, is that it does not teach kids in any way, shape, or form how to live in life with money and investing, or how to get a mortgage and what that looks like. My daughter came to me the other day. She's like, I don't think you ever told me, and she's 27, how to like do a budget or anything. Like, she's just flying by the seat of her pants. I'm like, that's so funny, because I woke up this morning thinking I really should teach her how to do that. I never really had that conversation with her. Um, in life skills, and then throughout doing more life skills, like, how we do, go to work with a parent, right? And so, like, my husband worked in sports. And so, okay, what do I need if I want to do this job? What do I need if I want to do my mom's job? And then, more like you're saying, the mentorship piece, and then backtracking it and going, okay, what is it that I need to go if I want to be this profession? And constantly inviting kids to learn. I think it was my oldest daughter. She was like, I want to be a writer. I like to write. And so when we would drive around, I would say, see that billboard, someone wrote that. Like, being a writer doesn't necessarily mean writing books. that advertisement is written, that, magazine is written, books are written. And so to invite her to look at different ways a writer could make a living, because as a kid, a lot of times that you don't see that peripheral. Yeah, I mean, for me, have you found anywhere in the world that has kind of a sample size of what you're talking about where you're like, okay, that works? I think that's a better system. Does one
Well,
exist?
Well, I mean, in the United States, I mean, there's some absolutely fantastic libraries. I got to go back to the library model because, libraries have really gotten competitive with, as far as the programs and things that they're developing. They're wonderful places for kids. They bring, they can bring in lecturers. That they've been engaging the community to be able, where communities can, rent or reserve spaces for various things that they host. I just think it's sort of developing that. I know that there was some experiments in the slums of India where they left a computer out in the public, and the kids were engaging with the computer on their own and learning how to program, and then the older kids would teach the younger kids how to work on the machines, and it was remarkably successful, all without any intervention. Just kind of amazing. So there's been limited experiments, of that nature, that have been done to show how people can learn. I mean, that's one of the other issues with compulsory schooling is the age segregation and the way the socialization is such that people that kids fear anyone older than them and resent anyone younger than them. And here it's much more healthier to where the kids learn to teach someone
Hmm.
who is younger, and it's just the empathy it develops, and just the compassion, which is just really beaten out of kids in schools. And there have been all sorts of studies on just the way empathy diminishes over the years and in schooling.
Well,
Um,
I actually, it's funny that you just brought that up. I dog-eared some of the pages. You wrote, schools make children believe that they are defective because they suffer when they are placed in an oppressive environment. That's just plain sick. In addition to approving the torture of children held in captive environments, the defenders of schooling blame children for the mental health consequences of the abuse they endure. So basically, it's like, it's your fault that you can't sit here for 6 hours and keep your hands to yourself and not speak. And so now we're going to drug you, or, whatever, detentions and so on and so forth for not. I mean, I was not only bossy in school because I'm a girl, of course, otherwise I'd have been a leader. And I was also, talkative, as so many girls are labeled. And, now we see so many kids being put on ADHD medication, which is all over the place of, being accepted, and it makes good kids, good students. And so I never, before reading this crazy ass book that just challenges your brain to explode, I never thought about so many of the things that you bring up, that we are putting kids into these systems and they're the problem if it doesn't work. I've shared this with my sister. She has a very energetic son. And, we've been talking about your book and how maybe the kids aren't the problem. Maybe it's the system that we're trying to cram them into. Um, where is your head at when it comes to, the ADHD and the ADD? Do you think these kids have these disorders, or do you feel like they're just humans living a human experience? They they hold a lot of energy. They absorb a lot of energy, and placing them in a seat for 6 hours is unnatural.
well, I think um, there's evolutionary development has forced some people. Uh, we're a tribal species, and if you go back, thousands of years, some people, you need within a tribe some people who are able to focus very closely on certain things, and other people who have less focus, because the people who are very focused, aren't going to be aware if there's a predator nearby. If they're really, they're someone who is less focused is going to be more in tune to environment, and they're both different sets of skills, but one set of skill is more adaptive to the compulsory schooling environment, and the ones that aren't are now treated as defective in some capacity. So it's not that that there aren't people who have different characteristics. There are, but one is pathologized because it doesn't work in this particular environment. Because a lot of the people, most of the people, many anyway, who are on these drugs, suddenly they don't need to be on their medications during the summer when they're not in school. So it's like, maybe you're
Yeah.
not it's just, maybe it's just forcing you to be. But then, because they have a diagnosis, they come to think that they're defective too, that there's something wrong with them because they have a diagnosis. And that's the tragedy of it, is you're being made to, you don't need to be on this drugs during the summer. Why is that?
Or
But
even
you
the
can.
weekends. I mean, a
Yeah,
lot of times I've
yeah.
been told, through people that I know around me, like the kids take the medicine in the morning, maybe at 1 o'clock if it's not an extended release. But then they don't have to take it on the weekends. They don't have to take it in the summer. It's literally a pill to help with being in school and to stay on task. And then the other time, see, I've made videos on social media that ADHD, ADD is a superpower. I look at kids, like my daughter, who I'm sure is ADD, would be, right, if we actually took her to get whatever diagnosed. And she's not necessarily book smart strong. She gets A's and B's, but she has to really, really work at it. But she could, like, plan a whole weekend. She could get everyone in and out of Chicago on a train at 16. Like, she can do all the things. And a lot of times she'll look at her friends that are very, very book smart, as she says, as like, these can't get themselves out of a paper. Like, literally regurgitate. If you really good luck, um, is to get her a diagnosis to allow her to get more time on tests, which really sucks because I don't want to get her a diagnosis. I don't want her to have to get on medications or an IEP or a 504 or whatever so that she can have an extra hour to take tests. That's, I think, the difficulty here.
Yeah, it's a
I think I'm delayed for
again,
you.
I agree with you about it being, it's a definite skill in certain environments. It's different traits are better adapted to different environments, and so, yeah, no doubt there's many things that are much easier for her than it would be for someone who has an intense kind of focus. It's again, yeah, it's the consequence of that kind of structure.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times these people that have ADD, ADHD personalities, they are some of the people that are running companies. They're the people that are able to do 700 things at once, go in and out, in and out, in and out. Like, I know I myself would probably be diagnosed with that, but it also allows me to go in and out, do laundry this morning, clean the house, get ready for the podcast. You know what I mean? Like, schedule 16 more podcasts this morning. Like, I am able to, like, pop in and out and not hyper focus. I'm able to focus and then pop back in. And I think I mean, I've always looked at it as a superpower that I can accomplish a lot all at once. Um, so I do have to ask you, what is the deal? You have to talk about it, about being gifted part of an island. What?
That's a whole separate. Uh, that's a whole separate project. So,
I know, but we still have to talk about it because it's crazy.
leaving schools and going off to. So I was working on a film project in Vanuatu. Vanuatu used to be the New Hebrides, and the New Hebrides had an interesting history, where they were just brutally exploited by the British and French. It was just far too remote a location, for the two countries to fight over. So they ruled it as a condominium government. Um, This is really going down a different path. Um, and they, for all the problems and the many downsides of colonialism, there's an upside too for the population, in that the colonizing government would build the infrastructure of the island. They would build roads and give it access to trade and the outside world in various ways. Yes, at the sacrifice of culture, but the improvements also led to greater longevity and better health outcomes and better survival in the future. So it's mixed. I'm not defending, but in this situation, it was the worst because the French didn't want to develop anything on the island because they were like, let the British do it, and the British, took the same response with the French, and so all they did was exploit the labor, and they would, take people as basic slaves and to the various nearby islands and use the resources and also the natural resources on the island. They would, cut down trees or what have you. And the only thing they would send to the island were missionaries, and the missionaries were extremely brutal and would burn down villages and imprison tribal leaders trying to force them to convert. Um, so they were in a pretty desperate situation, as this was just escalating over time as the British and French uh, rule got more and more oppressive because the people were refusing to convert.
Yeah.
Uh, and then World War II broke out, and they uh, they weren't too the Japanese. The brutality of the Japanese has never been fully discussed because I guess it's been sort of overshadowed by the Germans. But the Japanese were every bit as bad as the Germans, and well, they were bad. I guess there was some genocide too in China, but they were just the treatment of the populations that the Japanese of the islands and things they took over was just unbelievable, horrible torture and murder. And even though these are isolated tribes, to some degree, word gets out, and they knew that this was going on. And lo and behold, the Americans show up, and they decide to set up as their theater of war in the South Pacific. They used the island of Santo, and New Hebrides was 83 islands, this archipelago, and they recruited labor from various islands, to help build up their system. Well, they'd seen the French boats, but they'd never seen anything on the scale of the American military machine. Even during World War II, it was just dwarfed everything that the Europeans had ever sent over to that part of the world. I mean, the British had an amazing navy, but this was, I don't know how much they'd seen of that in there, but
Yeah.
this was now with industrialization. And the Americans that were there lived up to all of our noblest ideals. They just treated all the people with respect. They acted like they were guests on the island. They appreciated all the support that they got from the natives to help build the airstrips and airfields and the wharves for the boats and stuff. And they like, is there anything you guys need? And they said, well, some food would be nice. And however much food they expected or hoped that they might get, the Americans dropped 40 times, 60 times more
Wow.
in food. They gave them medical care. They just and and they knew that they were safe from the Japanese. And it was basically just they described it as a nonstop party basically on the island. And then the war ended, and the Americans left, and they told the British and French, hey, we've got these jeeps and other gear here. We'll sell it to you guys for 10 cents on the dollar. And the British and French were like, why? You're not going to take it with you. We're not going to pay you a cent. And this is after the Americans liberated France and fought to stop. And the Americans are like, fine, and they just drove it all into the water.
Get out.
All the jeeps, and they dumped it all into the ocean, and left. And the British and French then resumed, even after experiencing, at least for the French, the occupation. They resumed their oppressive tactics. They re-imprisoned all the tribal leaders, and the Americans came back. I know it's a long story. I'm sorry. The Americans
No, you're
came back,
good.
and uh, with some help, they managed to, they one of there was an American who gave an American flag to one of the tribal members in hiding, and they raised the American flag, and the British and French were incensed. Why is there a flag of a foreign government on this island? Anyway, through some negotiation, the Americans, then intervened, got the people, the tribal leaders released, and got the French and British to back off and let the people practice their religion. So it's an amazing story in that thing. So every single day they raise the American flag on the island, and then on February 15th, on the anniversary, they um, they have a celebration where the tribesmen paint USA on their chests, and they have bamboo poles, and they do these military drills and marching to celebrate America, and and the liberation of the tribes. So on that day, February 15th, I plan to come out and visit, and they've had Peace Corps, and they've seen plenty of Americans, since then. It's not completely remote, and but I managed to get a whole bunch of different corporations. I was doing a film on this to provide all sorts of contributions to the people on the island, and uh, and so I had just a boatload of goods to hand to the to the chiefs, and to have them distribute to their tribes, and they before I managed to bring it, they one of the government on the island is different from the tribe on the island. The government
Mm-hmm.
is is comprised mostly of people who were converted, uh, um, and um, and so there's a distinct difference between the government and the tribe. But the government is just a small number of people, but they handle the the effectuation of the things that are necessary. And there's one main government on a different island, and they work together. Um, so there was a corrupt member of the government that tried to seize all the goods, and and said that he would distribute them after I left, and it was clearly
Wow.
going to be the case. And
Yeah.
um, so they they brought me into a cell and interrogated me in this concrete place, and they beat a pig to death in front of me uh, and um, I just filmed this horrifying project in Uganda, where was in a war zone and come face to face with some really terrible things. So for some reason I had my wits about me, and figured that they really couldn't harm me, even though this was pretty messed up. So I told them that I was going to that I wasn't going to turn over the stuff, and I would have to decide what I was going to do, and I might take the stuff back with me. At some point, I realized that they couldn't hold me there for any length of time, and I was there for a couple hours, and it was pretty intense because I was, but they released me, and so I went to the chief, and I let the chief know that, hey, I've got all this stuff, I was going to give it to you, but this guy stopped me. So they threatened to burn down everything government on the island, and either chase them off the island into the ocean or murder them in the process. And the government was then got pretty afraid that anything that so they sent soldiers to the hut where I was staying, and had them march with me so that I could deliver all the goods, because there's still loose elements on the island where there's violence erupts with
Yeah.
getting machete to death. They didn't want anything to happen to me, because they were afraid that they would get blamed for it. So they sent soldiers and had me, deliver, all these goods to the island, and so the optics of all this led them to believe that I was this prophesized individual, that their John Frum was the name of their this sort of mysterious figure that they had claimed was going to transform the culture on the island and rescue them, and save them, and so they believed that John Frum prophesized my arrival. And so in
I
addition
mean,
to
you
bringing,
never know. No offense, Kevin, but I mean, this is kind of a crazy ass story. I might have believed the same thing had I been on that island with them. I'd be like,
well, yeah, it gets more interesting because I mean, there were more things that I did. They claim that I was going, that my route was going to cause the transformation, and their religion did become a political movement with my help there, and I also, with much to the relief of the government, the Vietnamese mafia was trying to turn the islands into a Cayman Island place where they could do money laundering, and they were making all sorts of inroads with the tribe to cement a relationship, and I managed to sever that and get the
stop
Vietnamese
it.
mafia. So so I did contribute to various, things, whether that makes me the chosen one that was prophesized about. I'm not going to venture and say, but I do feel very good about the contributions that I made to the island. That
Yeah.
that I did get the government to turn around in terms of um, their regard for me, because originally the government was not happy. I mean, even though they were the ones who were trying to steal stuff, they didn't like the bonds that I had made, and that I was resisting. Again, actually, here's where schooling does tie in. The government was really wanted the villagers to go to school, and that sounds positive in some capacity, if one believes in school. But the reason why they wanted them to go to school was because it would separate them from the parents, and their schools are they don't have the division that we have of, or that might be eroding, of separating religion and state. So their schools were religious institutions. If the kids went to schools, they'd be religiously indoctrinated. They'd
Yeah.
be alienated from their parents when they went back home because they'd have different religious beliefs, and they would end up extinguishing. And this is a perfect example of one of the horrible things that schools do is the erosion of culture, of whatever culture that the family has becomes subordinate to the culture of schools because of the social environment in schools. Anything outside of certain norms is looked down and at and humiliated and ridiculed. So they can't. Some of those cultures are really difficult to sustain. So
Have you looked at like the Catholic school situation with the Native Americans in Canada where they found all those kids buried under the school? What was it, 768 bodies found underneath the Catholic native schools where they took them away from their native families, Native American families, and then to indoctrinate them, as we all know. I mean, this seems to be a playbook. Like, I feel like we're all catching up with social media to the playbook of government, religion, school, that they're all kind of, the right and left arm of the government of getting people to do what they want in God's name, in education's name, and so on and so forth to get the society to move in the way that the government wants them to. Do you see a pattern obviously when you're looking at all this stuff?
yeah, I mean, they're the bottom line is that compulsory schooling is a bad idea, and they're very bad places. And one of the things, whenever I do, I've made this film, The War on Kids. Whenever I did a screening of that, whenever I talk in front of people, what invariably always happens after every single talk is people will come up and they'll share with me some story of injustice that they either experienced directly or secondhand that has scarred them for life. That they've and they tell me of something that happened, and the fundamental, the very hallmark of public schooling is injustice. I mean, that is the central component. This is ultimately what drove me to put together this book. And one of the things about the book, I think, is that's important to understand is that there are a lot of kids. The society is just not set up, that where it's easy for many people to take their kids out of school. You need the babysitting feature of schools, and if you're a student and you're stuck there and your parents don't have the resources to find some alternative, the way the book is helpful is it provides a coping mechanism. You don't have to do anything in the book. but just knowing that you could, that you is empowering, and it helps you, and that helps you cope, and you can get by every day knowing that, you know, if they really push me far enough, there are things that I can do. Even if I don't do any of it, I know I can. And if they cross that line, whatever that line is, I can get through the day a little more easily and a little better. And at the end of the day, a lot of, you know, I think this the one of the features, is my hypothesis, is that coping skills are what uh, but ultimately is what's responsible for better students. You want to succeed in school, it has to do with how well you can cope with the environment.
Well, I think too, like just breaking down what parts of school and you pointing it out and going, you know, walking, like I was telling you before we went live, my mom was telling me, or somebody was telling me, that now the kids have to walk in elementary school with their hands on top of their head so they don't touch anyone or anything, right? When to be quiet, when to talk, when to go fast, when to go slow, when to sit, when to do all the things, right? And how to do them and in what way is good. And then those kids are benefit. And if if you're not as adept at a language or math, you're looked at less than. I think what I got out of the book is really seeing what authoritarianism and fascism, I guess you could call it, whatever, what it looks like in plain speak, broken down, and how we take society and the way in which we live for granted, that this just is the way that it is for the betterment of all. And through the book, I was able to look at a lot of what we're going through in our society right now, anyways, in the United States, and go, "Oh, wow, yeah, I guess that is kind of wacky." Um, but I think that it helps the student, the child, to at least go, "I'm not crazy," like you're saying, like, "I'm not nuts. This is screwed up. It is messed up that I want to go." I was also thinking about, I was talking about, it was somebody like, you go to elementary school, you have lots of, carpet time, lots of playing time. So I went to Montessori till second grade. So I had like freedom, like tons of freedom in Montessori school. Like you can go listen to Bach, you can go do biology and draw the innards of a body. Like I was doing all that shit when I was in kindergarten and first grade. Like I knew Bach, Beethoven, like I was doing all those things. And when you feel like, hey, this feels wrong, I feel like I'm not a bad person, but everyone's telling me I'm a bad person, and the school believes I'm a bad person, and I feel like I'm broken, and I would love to be able to focus, and I would be able to love to be able to sit still. And so when I read your book, I went, wow, the things I've taken for granted for 53 years are really kind of screwed up, to be honest. And it's not me, and I wasn't nuts, and I wasn't a bad kid, and C is not the worst thing you could ever have in your entire life, and um I think that it's tough because I get frustrated. They don't teach spelling anymore. Do you know that? There's no more spelling tests. And so they just have to figure it out, which is wild. So you learn spelling by doing, but you can get a point off for spelling something wrong on your paper, even though you were never taught how to spell it in the first place. So that's weird. But yeah, I just think I don't know what the answer is. I do know that for my family, the answer is, I'm not going to annihilate you for getting C's. I'm not going to annihilate you and make you sit here and do homework. That's on you. But at least I know I'm not nuts. And at least I know that the most important thing in the world is not that my kids are valedictorian, but are also not suicidal and are not negative on themselves for whatever their aptitude is at the moment. Like that's what I loved about the book, is that my takeaway is the kids aren't broken, that maybe the system, we're finally realizing that the system is.
Yeah, even the smaller things, just like, you're not lazy if you don't want to go to school. You're not lazy if you don't want to do schoolwork, because it holds no meaning for you. even if you do well, if you don't remember anything that you learned the previous day, or you've forgotten everything that after a test, or it was unconsciously you're doing that because it's an act of resistance, because the people oppressing you have wanted to stuff this into your head, and the only way you can fight back is to forget it. And that's,
Wow, yeah.
so um, it's really trying to first get people to appreciate that that all of their that their self-esteem shouldn't be conditional, that you shouldn't, that, just because you got a C or an F or an A, that none of those things have anything to do with who you are and how you should feel about yourself.
Yeah.
And that there is also this sense of learned helplessness, that one needs to overcome, that schools try to instill. And so it's one part that, and the other part was anarchist cookbook was all these different ways that the system can be taken down due to its own logical inconsistencies.
Yeah.
The system is broken, and there are ways that you can use the system against itself as a form of jujitsu. And
my favorite was still giving teachers their own report cards. I think that's just like, they would freak. I mean, the amount of times that my kids have come home, and even my older kids, they taught themselves most of their curriculum through YouTube, their entire schooling, because it was just not good enough at the school. So they'd go home and learn all the stuff they needed to learn via YouTube. But I so appreciate your book, The Student Resistance Handbook by Cevin Soling. Check it out on Amazon. Make sure I'm in frame. Check it out at Amazon. I even love this. It's kind of not set PBS. This is very PBS art, which I loved, and lots of cool quotes throughout. If nothing else, I suggest adults get this book to know how incredibly crazy the education system is, and just kind of check yourself as a parent for what you might be doing to your kids' mental health, self-esteem, self-worth by way of the education system that we have today. And it just helps open up your mind. And I think anytime you get out of the black and white and into that wonderful grayscale of kind of opening your eyes to stuff, I think that's huge. But thank you so much, Cevin, for being here today and sharing all. The question is, do you still have part of the island? I mean, is this in your name?
Yeah, I still have my island, and so yeah, it was my dream to be a supervillain. So I've got my island. I've got my minions. I just need my death ray.
I love it so much. I love it so much. All right, guys, thanks so much for being here, Cevin, and I'll see all of you here next week with Meredith with a Y. Check him out, The Student Resistance Handbook, on Amazon today. I'll see you guys later. Thanks for listening. If you would like to connect on a more personal level, head over to meredithwillits.com or on Instagram at Meredith with a Y for behind-the-scene footage and outtakes. Please subscribe and come back each week for more Meredith with a Y.